The doctor's hands were shaking. She stared at my file, at my husband's name, then switched off the ultrasound mid-exam like someone had just pulled the plug on my entire life. "Mrs. Mercer," she whispered, "you need to leave your husband today. Get a divorce lawyer first." I laughed. "We're having a baby. We're happy." Then she said words that made my world collapse. "I know what your husband did. And I have proof." If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type "interested" in the comments. And I will give you a heart. My name is Daphne Wilson. I'm 32 years old, 4 months pregnant, and until 3 hours ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was married to. Spoiler alert, I didn't know anything. And the man sleeping next to me every night? He'd been planning my destruction for over a year. Piece by piece. Lie by lie. Dollar by dollar. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand how a smart, successful woman with a marketing degree and a trust fund ended up sitting in a doctor's office learning that her entire marriage was a fraud. You need to understand how charm can disguise poison. How love can be a weapon. And how the person whispering "I love you" in the dark can be the same person plotting to destroy you in the daylight. I come from what people politely call old money. My grandmother Eleanor passed away 5 years ago and left me everything, $2.3 million in a trust and the historic Wilson family home where 5 generations of women had lived, loved, and raised their children. I never flaunted it. I worked hard at my own career. I drove a 10-year-old Subaru and bought my coffee at the same place every morning. The inheritance was security, not identity. It was supposed to protect me. Instead, it made me a target. I just didn't know it yet. I met Grant Mercer 4 years ago at my family's annual charity gala. The Wilsons had hosted it for decades, old money tradition, you know the type. That year, I was standing at the bar trying to escape a conversation with a man who'd asked about my financial situation within 3 minutes of meeting me. Subtle, right? Real Prince Charming energy. Then Grant appeared. Tall, dark hair, easy smile. He asked what I was drinking, made a joke about the terrible jazz band, and didn't mention money once. Not once. He claimed to be just a financial advisor who'd gotten a last-minute invitation from a colleague. Said he had no idea who the Wilson family was. Looking back, that should have been my first red flag. A financial advisor who doesn't research the host family of a major charity event? That's like a chef showing up to a cooking competition saying, "Oh, we're making food today?" Had no idea. But I was tired of obvious gold diggers. And here was this charming man asking about my favorite books instead of my bank account. He seemed genuine. He seemed real. He seemed safe. We dated for a year. Grant was attentive, thoughtful, remembered the smallest details. My favorite flower. The way I took my coffee. The name of my childhood dog. He insisted on paying for dinners even though I could have bought the restaurant. He sent me handwritten notes. He showed up with soup when I had a cold. He did everything right. Every single thing. Because he'd studied me like a textbook. He'd researched exactly how to make me fall in love with him. And I did. God, I did. My mother, Vivian, saw through him immediately. After their first meeting, she pulled me aside. "That man's smile doesn't reach his eyes," she said. "Something's wrong with him, Daphne. I can feel it." I told her she was being paranoid. Overprotective. Jealous, even. We fought about Grant constantly. Screaming matches. Slammed doors. Eventually, we just stopped talking. 2 years of near silence between me and the woman who raised me. Birthday texts and nothing more. All because I chose to believe my husband over my own mother. Spoiler alert, Mom was right. And she's been waiting patiently to say, "I told you so." At this point, she's absolutely earned it. Grant and I got married after a year of dating. Beautiful ceremony at my grandmother's estate. 300 guests. String quartet. Roses everywhere. He cried during his vows, tears streaming down his face as he promised to love and protect me forever. Looking back, those were probably the most honest tears he ever shed. Not from joy. From relief. His long game was finally paying off. He'd hooked the big fish. Now all he had to do was reel me in slowly enough that I wouldn't notice the hook in my mouth. After 2 years of trying for a baby naturally, we saw a fertility specialist. The diagnosis hit like a truck. Grant had severe male factor infertility. His sperm count was almost non-existent, and what little he had barely moved. Natural conception was essentially impossible. The doctor used words like extremely unlikely and statistically improbable. Translation: not happening without serious medical intervention. Grant seemed devastated. He cried in the car for 20 minutes. Apologized over and over like it was his personal failure. I comforted him. Held him. Told him we'd figure it out together. That's what marriage was about, right? What I didn't know was that Grant wasn't crying from grief. He was crying because his plan had just gotten significantly more complicated. All that emotion? That wasn't mourning. That was him recalculating. Adjusting. Figuring out how to turn this obstacle into an opportunity. We decided on IVF with a specialized procedure called ICSI, where doctors inject a single sperm directly into an egg. Our best chance, they said. Grant insisted on researching clinics himself. Spent weeks comparing options, reading reviews, making calls. Found one he said was perfect. Handled all the paperwork, all the appointments, all the coordination. At the time, I thought he was being supportive. Taking the burden off me because I was so emotionally drained. Turns out, he was being supportive in the same way a hunter is supportive when he sets a trap, very carefully, very precisely, making absolutely sure everything is in exactly the right place before he springs it. The first cycle failed. Devastating. I couldn't get out of bed for 3 days. Grant held me, whispered encouragement, promised we'd try again. The second cycle, 7 months ago, worked. Positive pregnancy test. 2 pink lines that changed everything. I cried happy tears. Grant held me close, already talking about nursery colors and baby names and the future he'd always dreamed of. Then, casually, he mentioned I should update my will. Now that we're a family, he said. Just to make sure everything's protected. I thought it was sweet. Practical. The kind of thing a good husband thinks about. I had no idea he was already counting my grandmother's money as his own. Already planning how he'd spend it. Already measuring my life in dollar signs. Everything seemed perfect. The loving husband. The baby on the way. The life I'd dreamed about since I was a little girl playing with dolls in my grandmother's garden. Picture perfect. Instagram worthy. The kind of happiness people write greeting cards about. I had no idea that in just 3 months, a stranger with trembling hands would show me documents that would burn my perfect life to ashes. And I had no idea that the fire had been set by the man sleeping next to me every single night. The man I trusted. The man I loved. The man I defended to my own mother. But here's the thing about fires, you don't always see the smoke until the whole house is already burning. And by then? By then, it's way too late to save anything. You can only grab what matters most and run. For months pregnant, and something had shifted in my marriage. Small things at first. The kind of things you notice but explain away because the alternative is too painful to consider. Grant started keeping his phone face down on every surface. New password I didn't know. He'd step outside to take calls, come back saying it was work stuff, and change the subject before I could ask questions. He claimed he was restructuring client portfolios during late-night calls at 11 p.m. on a Saturday. Now, I'm no financial expert, but I'm pretty sure the stock market takes weekends off. Unless Grant had secret clients in Tokyo, which he definitely did not, something else was going on. Something he didn't want me to know about. The late nights at the office multiplied. 3 times a week. Sometimes 4. He wouldn't come home until midnight, smelling like expensive cologne I didn't buy him and exhaustion I couldn't verify. He's a financial advisor, not an emergency room surgeon. What could possibly require that kind of schedule? What client needs financial advice at 11:30 on a Thursday night? Were people having portfolio emergencies? Did someone's mutual funds need CPR? I found receipts. A restaurant downtown I'd never been to. $280 for dinner for 2. A hotel in the city, 40 minutes from our house. Why would my husband need a hotel room so close to home? What possible reason could justify that? When I asked, Grant had answers for everything. Smooth, practiced answers that came just a little too quickly. Client dinner. Important networking. The hotel was for a conference that ran late, and it just made more sense to stay over than drive home exhausted. And when I pushed harder, when I asked more questions, his tone changed. Daphne, you're being paranoid. It's the hormones. My mother warned me about this. Women get irrational during pregnancy. Don't turn into one of those wives. I felt ashamed for even asking. That's how good he was at this. He made me apologize for questioning him. Made me feel crazy for noticing things that were actually happening. Gaslighting disguised as concern. Manipulation wrapped in love. The financial pressure intensified around the same time. Grant's requests about money became more frequent, more urgent, more creative. We should add me to your trust, he'd say over breakfast. What if something happens during delivery? I need to be able to access funds for the baby. It's just practical. Power of attorney is common sense. Every married couple does it. Unless you don't trust me? He wanted me to sell my grandmother's house. The house where 5 generations of Wilson women had lived. Where my grandmother taught me to bake cookies and plant roses and be strong. It's too big for us anyway, Grant said. We should sell it. Invest the money properly. I know exactly which funds would maximize our returns. The man wanted me to sell my grandmother's home and let him invest the proceeds. This is the same man who insisted we needed 3 different streaming services because he couldn't remember which one had his shows. That's who I should trust with $2 million? Absolutely not. Hard pass. Not happening. When I said no, gently, carefully, trying not to hurt his feelings, Grant's warmth evaporated. He became cold. Distant. Started sleeping on the far edge of the bed, claiming I moved too much now that I was pregnant. The arguments became more frequent. He'd bring up the trust. I'd refuse. He'd give me the silent treatment for days. His silent treatments lasted exactly until he got hungry. Funny how that worked. Apparently, his principles had a time limit, and that limit was an empty stomach. The moment his blood sugar dropped, suddenly he could talk to me again. Suddenly, we were fine. Until the next time I refused to hand over control of my inheritance. He barely touched me anymore. Blamed my changing body. Said he didn't want to hurt the baby. It sounded caring on the surface. It felt like rejection in my bones. Like I was failing at being pregnant the right way. Like my body was wrong somehow. I tried to talk to him about it. He said I was being needy. Hormonal. Difficult. I started to wonder if the problem was me. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe pregnancy was making me irrational. Maybe I should just trust my husband and stop questioning everything. That's what he wanted me to think. That's what abusers always want you to think, that you're the problem, not them. That your instincts are wrong. That you should ignore the voice in your head screaming that something is very, very wrong. One night, I woke up at 2 a.m. and Grant wasn't in bed. I found him in the kitchen, hunched over his phone, speaking in a hushed voice. I stood in the hallway and listened. "It's almost time," he was saying. "By spring, everything will be settled. Just need to wait until." He saw me and hung up immediately. "Work emergency," he said. "Go back to sleep, honey." I didn't ask who has work emergencies at 2 a.m. about things being settled by spring. I was too tired. Too pregnant. Too desperate to believe my marriage was still okay. So I went back to bed and pretended I believed him. Pretended everything was fine. Pretended I didn't hear the excitement in his voice when he said everything will be settled. Like he was counting down to something. Like he was waiting for a prize. My best friend Tara came over for lunch the following week. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and watched me make excuse after excuse for Grant. His stress. His work pressure. His adjustment to becoming a father. Finally, she put down her fork and looked at me with those eyes that had known me since college. "Daff, listen to yourself. When's the last time you talked to your mom?" I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because the answer was humiliating. "When's the last time Grant was actually happy to see you? Not performing happy. Not putting on a show for other people. Really, genuinely happy to see you walk through the door?" I couldn't answer that either. Because I couldn't remember. And that terrified me more than anything else. When had my husband stopped loving me? Or had he ever loved me at all? "Trust your gut," Tara said. "Something is wrong here." I told her she was being dramatic. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Grant's phone, always face down. His late nights. His sudden obsession with getting access to my money. The way he looked at me sometimes when he thought I wasn't paying attention, like I was a math problem to solve, not a person to love. Like I was an obstacle between him and something he wanted very badly. 4 months pregnant. Regular OB appointment for an ultrasound. My usual doctor was on vacation, so I was scheduled with a colleague instead, Dr. Claire Brennan. I went alone. Grant had a client meeting he absolutely couldn't miss. Standard appointment, nothing special. I laid back on the exam table, cold gel on my belly, waiting to see my baby dancing on the screen like always. Dr. Brennan was pleasant and professional. She made small talk while setting up the equipment. Asked how I was feeling. If the baby was moving much. All the normal questions. Then she opened my file. Glanced at the paperwork. Her face changed. She looked at my husband's name. Looked at me. Back at the name. I saw her hands start to tremble. She set down the ultrasound wand. Reached over and turned off the monitor completely. Just switched it off. Mid-exam. Like someone had hit a kill switch. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "I need to speak with you privately. Right now." Everything that happens next, everything you're about to hear, sounded like fiction when she first told me. Like something from a movie. Like it couldn't possibly be real. But it was real. It was so real it made my hands shake and my vision blur and my heart pound so hard I thought I might pass out right there in her office. And the worst part? The absolute worst part? My mother had tried to warn me. For 2 years, she'd been trying to warn me. And I'd called her paranoid, jealous, unable to accept my happiness. I'd chosen him over her. Defended him. Protected him. while he was plotting something so twisted, so calculated, so evil that when Dr. Brennan finally showed me the proof, I couldn't even cry. I could only stare at the documents in front of me and wonder how I'd been sleeping next to a monster without ever knowing it. What Dr. Brennan told me in that locked office changed everything. And what she showed me, that wasn't just evidence of betrayal. That was evidence of a crime. A crime my husband had spent over $50,000 to commit. A crime designed to destroy me completely. And he almost got away with it. I thought something was wrong with the baby. That's what you think when a doctor's hands start shaking and she turns off the ultrasound mid-exam, right? Your mind goes to the worst possible place. Birth defects. Genetic disorders. Something catastrophically wrong that's going to change your life forever. I couldn't breathe. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Every terrible scenario flooded my brain in 3 seconds flat. Dr. Brennan walked me to her office, closed the door, locked it behind us. The lock clicking into place is a sound I'll never forget. It was the sound of my old life ending. The sound of everything I thought I knew shattering into a million pieces. She sat down across from me, pulled a folder from her desk drawer, and said words that made my entire world tilt sideways. "Mrs. Mercer, I know what your husband did. And I have proof. Not there's something wrong with the baby. Not we need to run more tests. No. I know what your husband did. What my husband did. Not what happened to me. What he did. Deliberately. Intentionally. With planning and forethought and malice." She opened the folder. Her hands were still trembling. "My younger sister works at your fertility clinic," she said. 3 weeks ago, she came to me crying. She told me everything. When I saw your husband's name on your file just now, I recognized it immediately. Dr. Brennan's sister, Molly, was a nurse at the same fertility clinic Grant had so carefully researched. The clinic he'd insisted was perfect for us. The clinic he'd chosen with such precision and care. Now I understood why. He hadn't been looking for the best success rates or the most qualified doctors. He'd been looking for vulnerabilities. For weak points. For people he could buy. And he found them. 7 months ago, Molly told her sister a patient's husband had approached her at the clinic. Charming, well-dressed, seemed desperate but reasonable. He said he had a special situation that required discretion. His wife didn't know, he explained, but he was using donor sperm for their IVF cycle. Some family genetic issue he didn't want to burden her with. Nothing sinister. Just a private matter between husband and wife. He just needed help keeping it quiet. And he'd pay well for the assistance. $30,000. Let that sink in for a second. $30,000. For a nurse making $52,000 a year, drowning in student loans and credit card debt from a decade of underpaid healthcare work, $30,000 might as well be a winning lottery ticket. It was impossible to refuse. It was life-changing money. It was enough to make you ignore every ethical boundary you'd ever been taught. Molly helped switch the samples. Grant's sperm, which couldn't have produced a pregnancy anyway, was replaced with sperm from a paid donor. The embryologist was in on it too. Grant had approached him separately with another payment. $20,000 to look the other way and make sure the paperwork stayed clean. Between the two of them, the switch went undetected. And nobody questioned anything because this kind of thing isn't supposed to happen. Fertility clinics operate on trust. On the assumption that everyone involved wants the same thing, a healthy baby for a loving couple. Nobody suspects fraud because who would do something this twisted? The embryologist told Molly not to worry. The husband knows what he's doing, he said. It's not our business what arrangements married couples make. But it ate at Molly. Especially when she saw in the clinic records that the pregnancy was successful. Somewhere out there was a woman carrying a baby she believed was her husband's child. And it wasn't. That woman was me. And I had no idea. The guilt destroyed her. She couldn't look at herself in the mirror. She called in sick constantly. Started having panic attacks at work. She'd wake up at 3 in the morning drenched in sweat, thinking about what she'd done. About the lie she'd helped create. About the woman she'd betrayed for money. 3 weeks ago, she finally broke. She showed up at her sister Claire's apartment close to midnight, sobbing so hard she could barely speak. And she told her everything. I sat in that office listening to Dr. Brennan explain how my husband had spent $50,000 to frame me for cheating on him. $50,000. That's more than he spent on our entire wedding, including the honeymoon and the open bar where his college buddies got so drunk they tried to steal the ice sculpture. I guess I finally knew where his real priorities had always been. And they definitely weren't celebrating our love. They were destroying it. But there was more. So much more. Claire laid out the complete scheme. The plan Grant had been building piece by piece for over a year. A plan so calculated, so methodical, so absolutely diabolical that I couldn't even process it at first. My brain refused to accept what she was telling me. Phase 1 was already complete. Bribe the clinic staff. Switch the sperm samples. Make sure everyone stays quiet. Pay enough money that people ignore their conscience. Check. Done. Mission accomplished. Phase 2 is also complete. Wait for a successful pregnancy. Play the devoted, excited father-to-be. Build the perfect image of a loving husband who can't wait to meet his child. Post on social media. Tell everyone at work. Make sure the whole world sees what a good man he is. Check. Done. Oscar-worthy performance. Phase 3 was planned for after the baby was born. Grant was going to have the embryologist alter the clinic records. The paperwork would be changed to show that our second IVF cycle had failed. That way, it would appear we had conceived naturally afterward. No IVF. No medical intervention. Just two people having unprotected sex and getting pregnant the old-fashioned way. This detail was crucial. Because if the record showed IVF, there'd be questions about samples and procedures. But if the record showed natural conception, then there was only one way this baby could exist. I had to have slept with someone else. Someone who wasn't my infertile husband. Someone whose sperm actually worked. Phase 4 was the trap. After the birth, Grant planned to suggest a DNA test. He'd frame it as something sweet and sentimental. Proof of fatherhood to hang in the nursery. A celebration of their bond. A keepsake for when the baby grew up. Who could say no to that? What loving wife would refuse such a thoughtful gesture? It sounded romantic. It sounded meaningful. It sounded like something a devoted father would want. And I would have said yes. Of course I would have said yes. Why wouldn't I? I had nothing to hide. Or so I thought. Phase 5 was the kill shot. When the DNA test proved he wasn't the biological father, and when the medical records showed we had conceived naturally after IVF failed, he would have all the evidence he needed. His wife had cheated on him. The baby wasn't his. He was the victim. The betrayed husband. The man whose wife destroyed their marriage and their family. Our prenup had an infidelity clause. This is common in wealthy families. It protects the assets. Keeps gold diggers from walking away with everything after a quick divorce. If one spouse cheats, they owe the other spouse $500,000 in penalties. Plus, the cheating spouse forfeits any claim to the other's property. Plus, the wronged spouse can sue for additional emotional damages. In Connecticut, those lawsuits can get very, very expensive. Grant's endgame was crystal clear. He would walk away with $500,000 minimum from the prenup penalties. He'd destroy my reputation completely. Everyone would think I cheated on my devoted husband while he was supporting me through infertility treatments. He'd probably get more in a lawsuit for emotional damages. And I would have been so devastated, so confused, so desperate to protect my child that I wouldn't have fought back effectively. I would have been too broken, too ashamed, too focused on damage control to think clearly about legal strategy. He was counting on my shame to make me compliant. He was counting on my love for my child to make me weak. He was counting on my guilt, even though I'd done nothing wrong, to paralyze me while he took everything my grandmother had left me. He almost got away with it. He was maybe 6 months away from pulling it off. 6 months from destroying my entire life while everyone around us applauded him for being such a strong, forgiving man. Can you imagine? Can you even imagine standing in a courtroom while your husband presents evidence that you cheated on him, knowing you didn't, but having no way to prove it? Can you imagine watching him cry on the witness stand about betrayal and broken trust while he pockets your inheritance and everyone feels sorry for him? That's what he wanted. That's what he planned. That's what he spent over a year of his life orchestrating. Dr. Brennan pulled more documents from the folder. Molly had saved everything. She knew what she'd done was wrong. She knew she'd helped commit fraud. So she'd kept receipts. Insurance, maybe. Guilt, definitely. Whatever the reason, she documented everything. Original sample records showing the switch. The donor's ID number. Payment records that could be traced to accounts Grant controlled through shell companies he thought were untraceable. There were even email communications between Grant and the embryologist. They thought they were being clever, using personal email accounts instead of the clinic's official system. Using vague language. The arrangement we discussed. The special handling we agreed upon. The compensation as promised. But there was enough. More than enough. Any prosecutor would have a field day with this paper trail. Molly had also tracked down the donor. His name was Derek Sykes. A 28-year-old graduate student who'd been paid $15,000 in cash to provide his sample. Normal sperm donation pays maybe $100. Sometimes $200 if the clinic is really desperate for donors with specific characteristics. $15,000 should have been a massive red flag. But Derek had $60,000 in student loans and a credit card balance that made him nauseous every time he checked it. $15,000 for 20 minutes in a collection room? He didn't ask questions. He should have. But student debt doesn't pay itself. Derek was told it was a private arrangement for a couple who wanted extra discretion. Maybe the wife had strict religious family who wouldn't approve of donor conception. Maybe they wanted to keep it quiet for personal reasons. He had no idea he was part of a fraud. He had no idea some woman out there thought she was carrying her husband's baby when it was actually his. When Molly tracked him down and told him the truth, Derek was furious. Absolutely furious. Not at Molly. At Grant. At being used. At being turned into an accomplice in someone's elaborate revenge plot without his knowledge or consent. He was willing to cooperate. More than willing. He wanted Grant to pay for what he'd done. There was one more thing. Claire said this carefully, watching my face. Something her own research had uncovered after Molly came to her. Something that explained why Grant was so desperate for money. Why he needed my inheritance so badly. Why he'd spent over a year planning this elaborate fraud instead of just asking me for help. Grant Mercer had $180,000 in gambling debts. $180,000. He'd been gambling for years. Online poker. Sports betting. Casino trips he told me were business conferences for financial advisors. All those late nights at the office? He wasn't restructuring portfolios. He was losing money he didn't have on basketball games and blackjack tables. all while pretending to be a responsible financial advisor with his life perfectly together. And the money for the bribes, the $50,000 he'd paid to corrupt my IVF treatment and frame me for adultery, he'd embezzled it from his own clients. Small amounts over time. 500 here. 1,000 there. Carefully hidden in the accounting, buried in quarterly statements that most people don't read carefully. His firm had no idea yet. But they would. Eventually, someone would notice the discrepancies. Eventually, the math wouldn't add up. And when that happened, Grant would lose everything. His license. His career. His freedom. Grant wasn't just trying to steal my inheritance. He was a drowning man grabbing at anything within reach. His gambling debts were crushing him. The people he owed money to weren't patient bankers who sent polite reminder letters. They were the kind of people who don't file lawsuits when you don't pay. They're the kind of people who make house calls. Late at night. With friends. I was supposed to be his life raft. My grandmother's money was supposed to save him from his own stupidity and addiction. And he was willing to destroy me completely to get it. He was willing to frame me for adultery. Ruin my reputation. Take my child's security. Steal what 5 generations of Wilson women had built. Also, he could pay off gambling debts he'd racked up while pretending to be someone he wasn't. I sat in that office for a long time. The papers spread out in front of me. The truth burning a hole in my chest. Shock came first. Cold, paralyzing shock that made my hands numb and my vision blur. Then disbelief. I kept reading the documents over and over, looking for some mistake, some misunderstanding that would make everything okay again. Maybe I was reading it wrong. Maybe there was another explanation. Maybe this was all a horrible mix-up and Grant was actually innocent and we'd laugh about this someday over wine after the baby was born. But no. The evidence was right there. Clear. Undeniable. Documented. Then the pieces started clicking together. The late nights that had nothing to do with work. The secret phone calls about things being settled by spring. His obsession with accessing my money, with getting power of attorney, with selling my grandmother's house. His careful, calculated attention when we were dating. How he'd known exactly what to say, exactly how to act, exactly which buttons to push to make me fall in love with him. He'd researched me before we ever met. The charity gala where we accidentally bumped into each other wasn't an accident at all. He knew exactly who I was and what I was worth before he ever said hello. He'd probably known my net worth before he knew my favorite color. He'd studied me like a con artist studies a mark. And I'd made it so easy for him. The way he cried at our wedding, those tears I thought came from joy? They were tears of relief. His long con was finally paying off. He'd locked down the target. Signed the contract. Now all he had to do was wait for the right moment to spring the trap. And my mother, Vivian, who I'd pushed away for 2 years. Who I'd called paranoid and jealous and overprotective. Who I'd accused of being unable to accept my happiness. She'd seen through him in 5 minutes flat. One dinner. One conversation. And she knew. His smile doesn't reach his eyes, she'd said. Something's wrong with him, Daphne. I can feel it. She tried to warn me. Begged me to be careful. Questioned his motives. Asked me to slow down, to really think about whether I knew this man as well as I thought I did. And I chose him over her. Defended him. Protected him. Stopped talking to my own mother because she dared to suggest my perfect husband might not be perfect. I thought about crying. I thought about screaming. I thought about driving home right then and confronting him. Throwing those papers in his face. Watching him scramble to explain. Watching him try to lie his way out of documented evidence. watching his face when he realized I knew everything. But then something else happened. Something cold settled into my stomach. Something sharp and focused and absolutely calm. A clarity I hadn't felt in months. Maybe years. He thought I was stupid. He built this entire scheme on the assumption that I would crumble. That when his trap sprung, when the DNA test came back and proved I'd supposedly cheated, I'd be so devastated that I'd just hand over whatever he wanted to make it stop. To protect my reputation. To protect my child. To avoid the scandal and the shame and the public humiliation. He thought I was weak. He thought I was naive. He thought I was an easy mark who'd inherited money she didn't deserve and didn't know how to protect. He thought I was a helpless rich girl who'd never had to fight for anything. He thought wrong. He had no idea who he'd married. He'd researched my bank account, but he'd never bothered to learn about the women who came before me. The Wilson women who'd survived wars and depressions and personal tragedies that would have broken weaker people. The women who'd built that fortune he wanted so badly, not by being weak or stupid or easy to manipulate, but by being smart and tough and absolutely ruthless when they needed to be. My grandmother used to say that Wilson women don't break. We bend. We adapt. We survive. And when someone tries to burn us down, we rise from the ashes and build something better. Grant was about to learn that lesson the hard way. I looked at Dr. Brennan. Her eyes were worried, concerned, probably expecting me to fall apart. He doesn't know that I know, I said. It wasn't a question. It was confirmation. No, Claire said. My sister hasn't told anyone else. And I only connected you to the case when I saw your file today. Nobody knows that you know. Good, I said. I gathered the documents carefully, methodically, like I was collecting evidence for a trial. Because that's exactly what I was doing. I need copies of everything. Every document, every email, every payment record, every communication. And I need you to connect me with Molly directly. I need her full cooperation. What are you going to do? Claire asked. I stood up. My hand rested on my belly, on the baby who was completely innocent in all of this. A child who didn't choose their biology, didn't choose their father, didn't choose any of the ugliness swirling around their existence. A child I already loved, regardless of DNA tests or donor IDs or whose sperm had created them. This baby was mine. That's all that mattered. My husband thinks he's been playing chess, I said. My voice was steady. Cold. Absolutely certain. He thinks he's 3 moves ahead. He thinks he's already won. He thinks the game is over and he's just waiting to collect his prize. I straightened my shoulders, felt something settle into place inside me. Something strong. Something dangerous. Something Grant had never seen before because I'd never needed it until now. He's about to find out I already flipped the board. And when I was done with him, when I'd dismantled every lie and exposed every crime and destroyed every plan he'd spent a year building, he was going to wish he'd never heard the name Daphne Wilson. He was going to wish he'd chosen literally any other target. Because the Wilson women? We don't just survive betrayal. We make damn sure it never happens to us again. I drove home from that appointment with my face carefully neutral. Hands steady on the wheel. Breathing even. Expression blank. Just in case. Because Grant had installed security cameras around our house 2 years ago. At the time, he said it was for protection. For safety. In case someone tried to break in. Now I wondered if it was surveillance. If he watched the footage when I wasn't looking. If he was tracking my expressions, my movements, my comings and goings, looking for any sign that I suspected something. Looking for cracks in my performance. Looking for proof that his plan might be falling apart. So I gave him nothing. Absolutely nothing. My face was a mask. My body language was relaxed. I even stopped and picked up his favorite takeout on the way home, because that's what the unsuspecting, loving wife would do. That's what he expected. So that's what he got. He was waiting when I got home, standing in the kitchen with that smile that didn't reach his eyes. My mother's words echoed in my head, 2 years too late but finally making perfect sense. "How was the appointment?" he asked. His voice was warm, concerned, exactly what a caring husband would sound like. "Is the baby okay? Everything measuring on track?" I smiled back, walked over and hugged him. Let him wrap his arms around me like he actually cared whether I lived or died. Like he wasn't actively plotting my destruction. Like I was his wife and not his retirement plan. I showed him the ultrasound photo Dr. Brennan had printed before everything changed. Before my entire world exploded. "Perfect," I said. My voice didn't shake. Not even a little. "Everything's absolutely perfect. The baby's healthy. Growing right on schedule. Dr. Brennan said everything looks great. I deserve an Oscar for that performance." I smiled at him over dinner while mentally calculating how much his bail would be. I asked about his day while picturing him in an orange jumpsuit doing a perp walk on the evening news. I even laughed at his joke about baby names. It wasn't funny at all. Something about naming the baby after his grandfather who he'd never once mentioned in 3 years of marriage. But I committed to the role like my life depended on it. Because in a way, it did. Later that night, I apologized. Actually apologized. For being paranoid lately. For questioning him. For being difficult and hormonal and acting like one of those wives he'd warned me not to become. I blamed it all on pregnancy hormones, used the exact same excuse he'd thrown at me for months. "I'm sorry I've been so suspicious," I said, curling up next to him on the couch. "You're right. I've been irrational. I don't know what's wrong with me. I just want us to be happy. I want our family to be perfect." His whole body relaxed when he heard it. The tension in his shoulders melted away like ice in summer. His smile became genuine for maybe the first time in weeks. He thought he was still winning. He thought his plan was still on track. He thought his stupid, paranoid, hormonal wife had finally stopped asking inconvenient questions. He thought he'd successfully gaslit me into doubting my own instincts. Mission accomplished. That night, he slept soundly beside me. Deep, peaceful sleep. The sleep of a man who thinks he's gotten away with something. I lay awake until 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, planning his destruction. Step by step. Move by move. Every detail carefully calculated. I wasn't just going to expose him. I wasn't just going to divorce him. I was going to dismantle his entire life piece by piece until there was nothing left but rubble and regret. The next morning, I called in sick to work. Told them I had a pregnancy complication and needed to rest. Then I drove 2 hours to a different city, checking my mirrors constantly to make sure I wasn't followed. Paranoid? Maybe. But I'd earned that paranoia. My husband had spent $50,000 trying to destroy me. A little caution seemed appropriate. I found a private investigator named Rosalind Weaver. Ex-police detective. 15 years on the force before going private. She had an office above a dry cleaner in a neighborhood that had seen better days. No-nonsense attitude. Sharp eyes. The kind of woman who'd seen everything twice and wasn't impressed by any of it. The kind of woman who'd heard every lie, spotted every con, and could smell bullshit from 3 blocks away. I told her everything. The whole twisted story. The fertility fraud. The bribed clinic staff. The plan to frame me for adultery. The prenup clause. The inheritance Grant was targeting. Every horrible detail. She listened without interrupting. Took notes in cramped handwriting that probably only she could read. And when I finished, when I'd laid out the whole sick scheme, she smiled. Not a happy smile. A predator's smile. A shark who just spotted a bleeding swimmer. Your husband made a lot of mistakes, she said. Arrogant men always do. They think they're smarter than everyone else. They think they've covered their tracks. They think nobody will ever figure it out. And that's when they get sloppy. That's when they leave evidence everywhere. She leaned back in her chair. Give me 2 weeks. Maybe less. Men like your husband always have more secrets than the ones you already know about. I'll find them. She had results in 10 days. 10 days. Faster than I expected. More damaging than I could have hoped for. Rosalind came to meet me at a coffee shop an hour outside of town. Somewhere Grant would never go. Somewhere nobody would recognize either of us. She slid a folder across the table. Thick. Heavy. Full of papers that were about to change everything. Grant's gambling debts totaled $180,000. Confirmed and documented. He owed money to online betting sites with names I'd never heard of. Underground poker games that operated out of warehouses and private clubs. And a few private lenders who definitely didn't file paperwork with the IRS. The kind of creditors who get very creative when payments are late. The kind who don't send reminder letters. They send people. The embezzlement was confirmed too. Approximately $53,000 missing from client accounts at his firm. Siphoned over 18 months through small transactions designed to avoid detection. $25 here. $50 there. Amounts small enough that most people wouldn't notice on their quarterly statements. But it added up. It added up to a felony. Multiple felonies, actually. His bosses had no idea yet. But they would soon. Very, very soon. And then there was the affair. 8 months. His assistant. A woman named Jennifer who was 26 years old and looked at Grant like he hung the moon. Hotel rooms charged to a credit card I didn't know he had. Romantic dinners at restaurants I'd never been to. Weekend getaways disguised as business trips to financial conferences that didn't exist. Rosalind had photos. Clear, undeniable photos. Grant and Jennifer holding hands across a dinner table. Grant and Jennifer entering a hotel together. Grant and Jennifer kissing in a parking garage like teenagers who thought nobody was watching. She had text messages too. Messages that made my stomach turn. Messages that proved this wasn't just physical. He'd been telling her he loved her. Told her they'd be together soon. Told her he just needed to handle some financial arrangements first and then they could start their life together. He'd been planning to leave me all along. The fertility fraud wasn't just about money. It was about setting me up so thoroughly that when he left, he could take everything and I'd have no legal recourse. I'd be the cheating wife. The woman who destroyed their marriage. And everyone would feel sorry for him when he started a new life with Jennifer. His assistant. Of course it was his assistant. How completely unoriginal. How absolutely predictable. If you're going to destroy your marriage, at least show some creativity. Having an affair with your assistant is literally chapter 1 of the cheating husband handbook. It's so cliché it's almost boring. Not that such a handbook exists, but if it did, Grant would have dog-eared that page and highlighted every sentence. I was almost insulted by the cliché. After all the effort he'd put into the fertility fraud, all the careful planning and calculated manipulation, he couldn't come up with a more interesting affair? This was the best he could do? But Rosalind found something else too. Something that proved this wasn't Grant's first rodeo. This wasn't his first attempt at landing a wealthy woman and bleeding her dry. 5 years ago, he dated someone in Boston. Caroline Ashford. Family money. Trust fund. Summer home on the Cape. The whole aristocratic package. They were together for 8 months before she discovered financial irregularities in a joint account he'd convinced her to open. Just for shared expenses, he'd told her. Just to make things easier. She found $5,000 missing. When she confronted him, Grant had a story ready. A sob story about medical bills for his mother. An emergency he'd been too embarrassed to mention. He'd pay it back immediately. He was so sorry. So ashamed. But Caroline wasn't stupid. She ended things immediately. Changed the locks. Closed the account. Cut him off completely. But she was too embarrassed to press charges. Too humiliated that she'd been duped. Too worried about what people would think if they knew she'd been taken advantage of by a con artist. So she let him walk away clean. She'd regretted it for 5 years. Regretted not protecting the next woman. Regretted letting him continue his pattern without consequences. Rosalind tracked her down. And Caroline was more than willing to provide a statement now. More than willing to testify. More than willing to make sure Grant finally paid for what he'd done. I've been waiting for this phone call for 5 years, Caroline told me when I called her. I knew he'd do it again. Men like him always do. They can't help themselves. I'm so sorry it was you. But I'm ready to help however I can. I met with Molly Brennan in secret. A coffee shop an hour from town where nobody would recognize either of us. She looked terrible. Thin. Pale. Dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept properly in months. The guilt had been eating her alive. Physically destroying her from the inside out. She started crying the moment she saw me sit down. Before I could even say hello. Before I could even order coffee. Just tears streaming down her face and apologies tumbling out like she'd been holding them in for so long they finally burst through. I'm so sorry, she kept saying. Over and over. I knew it was wrong. I knew it. The money. And he was so convincing. And I thought maybe he really was just trying to protect you from some genetic issue. I told myself it wasn't really fraud if he had good intentions. I convinced myself it was okay. But I knew. I always knew. I let her cry. Let her get it out. Because what Grant had done to me was horrible. But what he'd done to Molly was pretty terrible too. He'd found a vulnerable person and exploited her weakness. He'd turned her into an accomplice. He'd corrupted her ethics and destroyed her peace of mind and stolen her ability to sleep at night. All for his own gain. I stopped her finally. Put my hand on hers across the table. I need to know one thing. Are you willing to testify? Officially. On the record. In front of a judge if it comes to that. Are you willing to tell the truth even if it means consequences for you? She nodded without hesitation. Without even thinking about it. Like she'd been waiting for someone to ask her this question. Like she'd been waiting for permission to finally do the right thing. I'll tell them everything, she said. Her voice was stronger now. More certain. I should have gone to the police the day after it happened. I was just so scared of losing my license. My job. Everything I'd worked for. But yes. Whatever you need. I'll say it under oath. I'll testify. I'll face whatever consequences come. I just want to fix this. I want to stop him from ever doing this to anyone else. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman had helped my husband try to destroy me. She'd taken $30,000 to participate in fraud. By any measure, she was complicit. An accomplice. Someone who'd enabled his scheme and made it possible. But Grant had manipulated her the same way he'd manipulated me. He'd found her weakness, her student loans, her financial desperation, her fear of never getting ahead, and he'd exploited it. He was the architect. She was just a tool. A weapon he'd used against me. "Don't be scared anymore," I told her. "You're not the villain in this story. He is. And we're going to stop him together." The embryologist, once he learned Molly was cooperating and had kept records, developed a sudden and convenient conscience. Amazing how that works. Amazing how people suddenly remember their ethics when they realize they're going to get caught. He gave his own statement to Rosalind. Laid out the whole scheme in detail. He was terrified of losing his medical license and going to prison. Terrified of his career ending before he turned 40. So he flipped immediately. Turned on Grant without a second thought. He'd say whatever we needed to put Grant away. Whatever protected him and minimized his own culpability. Self-preservation is a powerful motivator. The hardest call I made was to my mother. 2 years of near silence. 2 years of choosing Grant over her. 2 years of defending him when she questioned his motives. 2 years of pushing away the woman who'd raised me because I thought she was the problem. I'd stopped inviting her to holidays. Stopped calling except for birthdays and Christmas. Called her jealous. Called her paranoid. Called her unable to accept my happiness. And she'd been right about everything. Every single thing. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Daphne. Her voice was cautious. Hopeful. Like she'd been waiting for this call for 2 years but didn't want to jinx it. Like she was afraid to believe I was actually reaching out. Mom. My voice cracked on the word. Just broke completely. All the strength I'd been maintaining for weeks suddenly collapsed. You were right. About everything. About him. And I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. There was a pause. A long pause. I braced myself for the "I told you so" she'd earned. For the anger. The resentment. The hurt I'd caused by choosing a con man over the woman who'd loved me my entire life. For the list of warnings I'd ignored and accusations I'd thrown at her. She had every right to say it. Every right to make me feel as small and stupid as I already felt. Instead, she said, "What do you need, sweetheart?" Just that. No gloating. No reminders of every warning I'd ignored. No pointing out that she tried to tell me for years. No lecture about judgment or trust or how I should have listened. Just, "What do you need?" That question. That simple question broke me more than anything else had. My mother is a retired attorney. Specialized in estate law for 30 years before she stepped back to enjoy retirement. Within 48 hours, she connected me with the best divorce lawyer in Connecticut and a criminal prosecutor who specialized in fraud cases. She made calls. Pulled in favors. Used every connection she'd built over 3 decades in the legal profession. And she never once said, "I told you so." Never once reminded me that she'd seen through Grant in 5 minutes flat. Never once made me feel stupid for not seeing what she'd seen. My mom taught me something that day. The people who really love you don't need to be right. They just need you to be okay. They don't keep score. They don't demand apologies. They don't hold grudges. They just show up when you need them and ask what they can do to help. I'd spent 2 years choosing a con man over the woman who raised me. And her first instinct when I called crying was still to protect me. That's what real love looks like. Grant never understood that because he'd never felt it. He didn't know what it meant to love someone without calculating what you'd get in return. He didn't understand relationships that weren't transactional. And that's exactly why he was going to lose. My lawyer was a woman named Sandra Kowalski. 5'2". Silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Reading glasses perpetually perched on her nose. Cardigans in soft colors. She looked like someone's sweet grandmother. The kind who bakes cookies and gives warm hugs and tells you everything will be okay. She was a shark in grandma's clothing. An absolute killer who'd built a reputation destroying men exactly like Grant. Sandra reviewed everything. The clinic documents. Molly's statement. The embryologist's cooperation. Rosalind's findings about the affair and the gambling and the embezzlement. Caroline Ashford's statement about Grant's previous con. Every piece of evidence we'd gathered. Every document that proved what he'd done. When she finished, when she'd read every page and reviewed every photo, she looked up at me over those reading glasses and smiled. Not a friendly smile. A dangerous smile. Your husband is facing fraud charges, conspiracy charges, and embezzlement charges, she said. The prenup infidelity clause works in your favor now because he's the one who's been cheating. And his little scheme to falsify medical records after the birth? That's a felony he was planning to commit. We have evidence of intent. That's enough to bury him. She coordinated with the prosecutor. Built an airtight case. Made sure every piece of evidence was documented and admissible. Made sure there were no loopholes Grant could slip through. Molly gave a formal sworn statement to police. On the record. Notarized. Video recorded. The embryologist cooperated in exchange for reduced charges. He'd lose his license probably, but he wouldn't go to prison if he testified against Grant. Grant's firm was quietly alerted about the missing funds. They began their own investigation immediately. Hired a forensic accountant to trace every transaction. And they immediately froze Grant's access to client accounts. Locked him out of the system. Made sure he couldn't steal another penny. A judge reviewed the evidence. All of it. The fertility fraud. The planned DNA trap. The embezzlement. The affair. The gambling debts. The pattern of behavior with Caroline Ashford. Found probable cause for arrest. Issued a warrant for fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement. My lawyer called it a formality at this point. I called it the best piece of paper I'd ever seen in my life. 8.5 by 11 inches of pure karma. The scales of justice printed right there at the top. 6 weeks after that ultrasound appointment, after 6 weeks of pretending everything was fine, I suggested to Grant that we throw a celebration. A baby moon party at my grandmother's estate. Both families. Close friends. An afternoon garden gathering to celebrate the baby coming soon. His eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Like he'd just opened the present he'd been wanting his whole life. More witnesses to his devoted husband performance. More people who would feel sorry for him later when his wife was exposed as a cheater. More fuel for the sympathy he was planning to milk for all it was worth. More proof that he was the good guy in this story. That's a wonderful idea, he said. He kissed my forehead in that gentle way that used to make me feel safe. That used to make me feel loved. Let me help plan everything. I want this to be perfect. No, I patted his chest. Smiled up at him like the devoted wife he thought I was. You've been working so hard lately. All those late nights at the office. All that stress with your clients. Let me handle the party. You just show up and enjoy it. This is my gift to you. He had no idea that my version of handling everything included police officers waiting in the guest house. My lawyer stationed near the bar with copies of every document we'd collected. Derek Sykes ready to testify. Molly Brennan prepared to tell the truth. Every piece of evidence organized in folders. Every witness prepared to speak. And his own parents about to learn exactly who their son really was. The party was scheduled for Saturday. Grant thought he was walking into his crowning achievement. He had no idea he was walking into his own funeral. And I was going to make sure everyone had front row seats to watch him die. The Wilson family estate in late spring. My grandmother's gardens in full bloom. 50 years of careful cultivation bursting with color. White tents on the back lawn. Champagne chilling in silver buckets. Flowers arranged on every table like we were celebrating something beautiful instead of orchestrating someone's complete destruction. A string quartet playing softly near the rose bushes. 50 guests milling about in their Sunday best. Family, friends, colleagues. People who thought they were coming to celebrate a baby. They had no idea they were coming to witness an execution. Grant's parents had driven up from Maryland. His mother kept dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. So proud of their successful son and his beautiful pregnant wife. His father walked around with his chest puffed out, shaking hands like a politician, talking about legacy and family and the Mercer name being carried forward. They had no idea their son was a criminal. They had no idea they'd raised a con artist who targeted vulnerable women for their money. They were about to find out. My grandmother would have loved this party. The gardens she'd spent decades cultivating. The house where 5 generations of Wilson women had lived and loved and survived. She also would have seen through Grant in about 30 seconds flat. But that's grandmother wisdom for you. The older generation has a radar for phonies that the rest of us have to develop the hard way. Usually after we've already married them and gotten pregnant. Grant was in his absolute element. Working the crowd like a politician at a fundraiser. Handshakes. Backslaps. That charming laugh he'd perfected over years of practice. His hand kept finding my belly for photos. Every time someone pointed a camera, there he was. The devoted father-to-be. Gazing at me with what looked like adoration but was actually just really good acting. He was so good at pretending to be human. For about 3 seconds, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the $50,000 he'd spent trying to destroy my life. The sympathy evaporated pretty quickly after that. His mother kept crying happy tears. I always knew he'd make a wonderful father, she told anyone who would listen. Such a good boy. Such a caring husband. We raised him right. His father beamed. Talked about grandchildren and traditions and how proud he was. How Grant had always been ambitious. Always been smart. Always been destined for success. Well, he was right about the ambition part. Just wrong about which kind. My own mother stood near the dessert table. Watching Grant with the patient expression of a cat observing a mouse that doesn't know it's trapped. She caught my eye across the lawn and raised her champagne glass slightly. A tiny gesture. Almost imperceptible. It meant, almost time. Almost time to spring the trap. Almost time to watch everything Grant had built come crashing down. Around 3 o'clock, Grant did exactly what I knew he would do. He'd been dropping hints for weeks about wanting to celebrate fatherhood with a DNA test. Frame the results in the nursery. Proof of their bond. So romantic. So meaningful. So completely staged. At the party, he brought it up again. Loudly. Making sure plenty of people could hear. Playing to his audience like the performer he'd always been. You know what we should do, honey? He pulled me close. Arm around my waist. Playing the loving husband for the crowd. I've been thinking about this. Let's get one of those DNA test kits. We can frame the results for the nursery. Proof that daddy and baby are connected forever. Wouldn't that be special? Wouldn't that be something amazing to show our child someday? Several guests made us sounds. His mother dabbed her eyes again. Someone said, "That's so sweet." Someone else said, "I wish my husband was that thoughtful." If only they knew. If only they had any idea what he was actually planning. I pretended to hesitate. Played the shy wife who needed convincing. Oh, I don't know. That seems like a lot of trouble. Do we really need to do that? Come on, it'll be amazing, Grant pressed. His voice was eager now. Excited. He could taste victory. Could already feel my inheritance in his hands. We could even open the results right here, right now. Make it part of the celebration. What do you think, everyone? Wouldn't that be incredible? Encouraging murmurs from the crowd. People nodding. Smiling. Completely oblivious to what he was actually suggesting. Someone said, "How sweet." Someone else mentioned they wished their husband was that thoughtful. Grant was practically vibrating with anticipation. Well, I looked around. Playing uncertain. Playing the role he expected. If everyone thinks it's a good idea. Grant was glowing. Absolutely glowing. This was his moment. The trap he'd spent over a year building was about to snap shut. He could already taste my money. My humiliation. My destruction. He just didn't realize whose neck was actually in the trap. Instead of pulling out a DNA kit, I walked toward the small platform we'd set up near the fountain. The one meant for toasts and speeches. I picked up the microphone. Tapped it twice. The crowd quieted. Everyone turned to look at me. Grant smiled up at me from the crowd. Champagne in hand. Already rehearsing his shocked, devastated face. Already practicing the tears he'd cry when the truth came out about his cheating wife. Already planning his next move. "Thank you all for coming today," I said. My voice carried across the lawn. Clear. Strong. Steady. This party is supposed to be about celebration. About family. About truth. I found Grant's eyes in the crowd. Held his gaze. Watched confusion flicker across his face for just a second before he covered it with that perfect smile. My husband said he wanted to reveal something special today. So I'm going to help him do exactly that. His smile flickered. Just for a second. The first crack in his performance. The first hint that something was wrong. I reached under the podium and pulled out a folder. Thick. Heavy. Full of the evidence that was about to destroy his entire life. 3 months ago, I learned something about my husband that changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. And I want to share it with all of you today. Because Grant is right. This should be about truth. Grant's smile was frozen now. His champagne glass had stopped halfway to his lips. His eyes were locked on that folder like it was a loaded gun. Grant and I struggled with fertility, I continued. My voice was calm. Conversational. Like I was discussing the weather and not about to ruin someone's life. His diagnosis meant natural conception was impossible for us. So we did IVF at a clinic he chose. He was very particular about which clinic we used. Very specific. I thought he was just being thorough. Turned out he was being strategic. I held up the first document. These are the records from that clinic. The original records. Before anyone had a chance to alter them. I let that word hang in the air. Original. Before alteration. Implying there were plans to change them. Grant's face went pale. Actually drained of color right there in front of 50 people. These records show that my husband bribed 2 clinic employees to switch his sperm sample with donor sperm. He paid $30,000 to a nurse named Molly Brennan. He paid $20,000 to the embryologist. And he paid $15,000 to a young man named Derek Sykes. I gestured toward the edge of the crowd where Derek had been waiting. He stepped forward. A 28-year-old graduate student who'd thought he was helping an infertile couple. Who'd had no idea he was participating in fraud. Derek provided the sperm that was used to conceive my child. Without my knowledge. Without my consent. My husband arranged all of this behind my back. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Actual gasps. Like something out of a movie. Grant's mother grabbed his father's arm so hard her knuckles went white. Someone dropped a champagne glass. It shattered on the patio stones. The sound was like a gunshot in the sudden silence. My husband's plan was simple, I continued. My voice never wavered. Never shook. Wait until our child was born. Demand a DNA test. And when the results proved he wasn't the biological father, which he already knew would happen, he would accuse me of having an affair. I held up more documents. Our prenup has an infidelity clause. If I had supposedly cheated, I would owe him $500,000. He could sue for additional damages. He could destroy my reputation completely. Make everyone believe I was the villain. And he could take everything my grandmother left me and walk away. Grant found his voice. It came out strangled. Desperate. Panicked. Daphne, honey, this is insane. You're confused. It's the pregnancy. The hormones. You're not thinking clearly. Someone's fed you lies. Someone's trying to come between us. I'm not finished, I said. My voice was ice. The crowd went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop in that garden. In addition to bribing the fertility clinic, my husband embezzled approximately $53,000 from his clients at his firm to fund the scheme. I looked directly at Grant's boss, who'd been quietly invited to the party. Specifically invited to witness this. His firm is now aware and investigating. The forensic accounting is already complete. Every transaction has been traced back to him. Grant's boss set down his drink. His face said everything. Shock. Disgust. Rage. The realization that one of his employees had been stealing from clients for over a year. My husband also has $180,000 in gambling debts, I continued. Money he owes to online betting sites, underground poker games, and private lenders who don't take late payments kindly. The kind of people who don't send reminder letters. They send people. Grant's mother made a sound like she'd been punched in the stomach. A wounded animal noise. And for the past 8 months, I pulled out the photographs. Nothing explicit. Just romantic enough to leave no doubt. Grant and Jennifer holding hands. Grant and Jennifer kissing. Grant and Jennifer entering a hotel. He's been having an affair with his assistant. Jennifer Martinez. 26 years old. He's been telling her he loves her. That they'll be together soon. That he just needs to handle some financial arrangements first. I displayed the photos. One by one. Let everyone see them clearly. Let his parents see exactly who their son really was. Let his friends see the man behind the mask. This wasn't even his first attempt, I added. Let that bomb drop. 5 years ago in Boston, he targeted another woman with family money. Caroline Ashford. They dated for 8 months before she discovered financial irregularities in a joint account he'd convinced her to open. That relationship ended when she found $5,000 missing. She's provided a statement to investigators and is prepared to testify. Grant's champagne glass slipped from his fingers. Fell in slow motion. Hit the stone patio and exploded. Champagne spraying across his expensive shoes. Glass shards everywhere. Like his life. Shattered. Irreparable. Those are lies, he stammered. His voice cracked. She's making this up. All of it. She's mentally unstable. The pregnancy has affected her mind. She needs help. Medical help. Someone needs to, Grant. His own mother's voice cut through the noise. Quiet, but sharp enough to draw blood. Is any of this true? He turned to face her. Opened his mouth to deny everything. To spin another lie. To manipulate his way out of this like he'd manipulated his way out of everything else his entire life. Nothing came out. No words. No excuses. No explanations. Just silence. Damning, guilty silence. Molly Brennan stepped forward from where she'd been standing near the guest house. Pale but determined. Ready to tell the truth finally. I'm the nurse he bribed, she said. Her voice was steady. I have documentation of everything. Every payment. Every communication. I've already given my statement to police. I'm prepared to testify in court. Derek Sykes spoke up next. He paid me $15,000 and told me it was a private arrangement for a couple who wanted extra discretion. I had no idea I was part of a fraud until Mrs. Wilson's investigator contacted me last month. I'm also prepared to testify. Grant looked around wildly. At the faces of people who'd been laughing with him 10 minutes ago. His colleagues. His family. The society friends he'd worked so hard to impress. Everyone was staring at him like he was something rotting they'd just discovered on their shoe. Something disgusting. Something that needed to be thrown away immediately. Then 2 police officers stepped out from the guest house. Walking calmly across the lawn. Unhurried. Professional. They'd been waiting for this moment. Waiting for my signal. Grant Mercer, the first officer's voice was professionally neutral. No emotion. Just facts. You're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. They handcuffed him right there. In front of everyone. His wrists behind his back. The metal clicking into place with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the garden. His mother was sobbing now. Completely broken. His father refused to look at him. Stared at the ground like he wished it would open up and swallow him whole. Like he could erase the last 35 years and pretend he'd never had a son. As they walked Grant toward the police car, he tried one last time. One final manipulation. One last attempt to make me feel guilty. To make me doubt. To make me stop this. Daphne, please, his voice cracked. Real tears now. Not calculated ones. Real fear. Real desperation. We can work this out. I made mistakes. I know I did. But I love you. I've always loved you. Don't do this. Think about our baby. Think about our family. Think about everything we've built together. I looked at him. Really looked at the man I'd shared my life with for 3 years. The man I'd defended to my own mother. The man who'd stood at an altar and promised to love and protect me while calculating how much he could steal. The man who'd held me while I cried about infertility and used my pain as an opportunity to destroy me. You're absolutely right, Grant, I said. My voice was calm. Final. I am thinking about our baby. I'm thinking about protecting my child from a con artist and a criminal. I'm thinking about making sure my family's money doesn't end up paying your gambling debts. And you know what? We just worked it out. They put him in the back of the police car. I watched it drive away down the long gravel path. Past the gardens my grandmother had planted half a century ago. Through the iron gates of the property Grant had wanted so desperately to own. The property he'd spent a year planning to steal. 50 guests stood in absolute silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody knew what to say. What do you say after watching someone's entire life implode at a garden party? Then my mother walked up and put her arm around my shoulders. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. Just for me to hear. "Your grandmother would be too. You did the right thing. The hard thing. The Wilson thing." And for the first time in months, I took a full breath. Like I'd been holding my breath for 4 months, and finally, I could breathe again. Grant was denied bail. The judge called him a flight risk. Between his gambling debts and the people he owed money to, there was too much chance he'd disappear. Just vanish and never come back. Those gambling creditors got very interested very quickly once the arrest made the news. They'd been patient while Grant had a wealthy wife. That patience evaporated the moment they realized the money train had derailed. Suddenly they wanted their money immediately. His affair partner, Jennifer, the assistant he'd been sneaking around with for 8 months, resigned from his firm the morning after the party. Didn't even clean out her desk. Just sent an email at 6 a.m. and vanished. Blocked his number. Blocked me on social media. Disappeared like she'd never existed. She didn't wait for the handcuffs to click shut before she ran. I've seen rats leave sinking ships with more loyalty. At least rats have the decency to look back once. Jennifer just evaporated. Grant's firm completed their internal investigation within 2 weeks. $53,000 confirmed missing. They filed their own criminal charges. Added to the pile Grant was already facing. They also reported him to every financial regulatory agency in the state. His license was revoked immediately. He'd never work in finance again. Even if he got out of prison someday, even if he somehow rebuilt his life, he'd never be trusted with other people's money again. The woman from Boston, Caroline Ashford, came forward publicly once she heard about the arrest. She'd spent 5 years feeling stupid for falling for his act. Too embarrassed to pursue justice. Too worried about what people would think. She wasn't embarrassed anymore. She gave interviews. Wrote an op-ed about financial predators who target wealthy women. Her statement added another layer to the case prosecutors were building. Another pattern. Another victim. More evidence that this was who Grant actually was. The divorce was finalized in record time. Grant's lawyer tried to negotiate. Tried to work out some kind of deal. But there was nothing to negotiate with. The prenup's infidelity clause, the one Grant had been planning to weaponize against me, worked in my favor now. He was the one who'd been unfaithful for 8 months. He owed me. Not the other way around. Not that he had anything to give. Every asset he claimed to own was either borrowed, stolen, or imaginary. The man had nothing. No savings. No investments. No property. Nothing. The criminal case moved quickly. Molly Brennan testified. Told the whole truth. Every detail. The embryologist cooperated fully in exchange for a reduced sentence. He lost his medical license but avoided prison time. Derek Sykes provided his statement. Explained how he'd been used. How he'd thought he was helping an infertile couple and instead was helping commit fraud. The paper trail Grant thought he'd hidden wasn't hidden at all. Every transaction. Every payment. Every email. Every text message. All of it was there. Clear as day. Undeniable. Fraud. Conspiracy. Embezzlement. Each charge stuck. Each charge carried years. His lawyer tried to argue for leniency. Claimed Grant had a gambling addiction. That he needed treatment, not prison. That he'd made mistakes but wasn't a bad person. The judge wasn't impressed. Mr. Mercer didn't just make mistakes, she said. He orchestrated an elaborate fraud spanning more than a year. He bribed medical professionals. He stole from his clients. He planned to falsify medical records. He targeted his own wife for financial destruction. These weren't impulsive decisions made during a gambling binge. This was calculated, premeditated criminal behavior. This court sees no reason for leniency. Grant Mercer was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. 8 years. He'd spend the next 8 years behind bars thinking about how he tried to destroy me and ended up destroying himself instead. His parents stopped coming to court after the first week. Stopped visiting. Stopped taking his calls. His father released a statement saying Grant had made choices that no parent can defend. His mother checked into a facility for exhaustion. Which is what wealthy people call it when they can't face reality. When their perfect life implodes and they need somewhere quiet to pretend it didn't happen. Grant Mercer, who had walked into my life 4 years ago with such careful charm, with such calculated precision, would spend the next several years in prison. And when he eventually got out, he'd have nothing. No money. No career. No family willing to acknowledge him. No future targets who wouldn't find his criminal record with a simple Google search. His name was permanently associated with fraud and betrayal. The trap he'd built so patiently, so carefully, had snapped shut on his own neck. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. My baby was born 4 months after the party. Healthy. Perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes. Absolutely innocent in everything that had happened. Some people asked if I was going to contact Derek Sykes. Include him somehow in the baby's life. Make him part of our family. I thought about it. Considered it carefully. But Derek was a 28-year-old grad student who'd made a dumb decision for money he desperately needed. He wasn't ready to be a father. Didn't want to be. And I didn't need him to be. My child would have me. Would have my mother, finally back in my life where she belonged. Would have the entire Wilson family. The legacy my grandmother built over decades of love and work. Would have 5 generations of strong women standing behind them. That was more than enough. That was everything. I learned something through all of this. Something important. Something true. Family isn't about DNA. It's not about blood tests or biology or genetic matches on a chart. Family is about who shows up. Who stays. Who chooses you every single day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Especially when it would be easier to walk away. My mother chose me when I didn't deserve it. When I'd pushed her away for 2 years. When I'd called her paranoid and jealous and wrong about everything. She chose me anyway. I chose my baby when the circumstances were complicated. When the biology was messy. When other people might have walked away or given up or decided it was too hard. That's what family actually means. My mother and I had lunch every week now. Making up for 2 lost years, 1 conversation at a time. We talked about everything. The past. The present. The future. My pregnancy. The baby. Her retirement. She never said, "I told you so." Not once. Not even as a joke. Finally, I asked her why. She set down her coffee cup and smiled. The kind of smile that held 30 years of wisdom and love and patience. "Because watching you take down that man was more satisfying than any 4 words could ever be," she said. "I don't need to say I told you so. You already know I was right. And more importantly, you learn to trust your own instincts. That's worth so much more than being right." I laughed. First real laugh in what felt like forever. A laugh that came from my belly and made my baby kick like they were laughing too. 3 weeks after the party, early morning, I sat in my grandmother's kitchen. My kitchen now. The house Grant had coveted so desperately. The house he'd wanted to sell and invest the proceeds from. The house where 5 generations of Wilson women had survived and thrived. Sunlight poured through windows that had watched 4 generations of Wilson women live their lives. The same windows my grandmother had looked through while drinking her morning tea 50 years ago. The same windows that would watch my child grow up in a house filled with love instead of lies. I made myself a cup of chamomile. Her recipe. Her favorite brand. Some traditions are worth keeping. My phone buzzed on the counter. Text from my mother. Lunch tomorrow? I smiled and typed back immediately. Always. Outside, the gardens were in full bloom. The roses my grandmother planted when she was a young bride. The hydrangeas she added when my mother was born. The lavender border I'd helped her install when I was 10 years old, my small hands patting dirt around each seedling while she told me stories about our family. About Wilson women who survived wars and depressions and betrayals. About women who bent but never broke. I put my hand on my belly. Felt the baby move. Strong kicks. Determined movements. A fighter already. Grant Mercer had tried to take everything from me. My money. My reputation. My future. My peace. My grandmother's legacy. My family's home. My sense of safety in the world. All he actually did was show me exactly how strong I'd always been. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for karma to arrive. Hoping the universe will balance the scales. Praying that bad people will eventually face consequences. I was lucky. I got to deliver mine in person. With documentation. In front of 50 witnesses. With police officers waiting in the guest house. My grandmother used to say that Wilson women don't break. We bend. We adapt. We survive. And when someone tries to burn us down, we rise from the ashes and build something better. We don't just survive. We thrive. We take the worst thing that ever happened to us and we turn it into our greatest strength. Grant thought he married an easy target. A naive rich girl who'd inherited money she didn't know how to protect. A weak woman who'd crumble under pressure. A Mark who'd hand over everything without a fight. He married a Wilson. And now he had plenty of time in a prison cell to think about that mistake. 8 years to think about the woman he underestimated. 8 years to regret every lie he told. 8 years to understand that the Wilson women have survived worse men than him for 5 generations. And will survive for 5 more. I looked around my grandmother's kitchen. My kitchen. My home. My legacy to protect and pass down to my child someday. The morning light caught the photo on the wall. 5 generations of Wilson women. My great-great-grandmother. My great-grandmother. My grandmother Eleanor. My mother Vivian. And soon, me with my baby. 6 generations. The legacy continuing. Stronger than ever. We don't break, I said quietly to the empty kitchen. To the ghosts of the women who came before me. To the child growing inside me. To myself. We don't break. We bend. We survive. And we win. And that's exactly what I did. Thanks for watching this story. If it moved you, shocked you, or made you feel something real, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment below and tell me, was my mother right all along? Should I have seen the red flags earlier? Have you ever had someone in your life who turned out to be completely different than who they pretended to be? Share your story. You're not alone. And if this story taught you anything, let it be this: trust your instincts, protect your peace, and never let anyone convince you that love means ignoring red flags. Real love doesn't cost you your sanity. Real love doesn't require you to abandon your family. And real love definitely doesn't involve $50,000 in fraud and a plan to destroy your life. The Wilson women survived. And so will you. More incredible stories are already on your screen. Click one now. You won't want to miss what happens next. See you in the next one.